Hi there, I'm Paul Mitchell, leadership coach, author and founder of the Human Enterprise. Well, welcome to Leaders for Life Radio, where we interview leaders from business, from sport, the arts and community. Today I'll be talking with Cian Mcloughlin, who hails from Dublin, Ireland and is the CEO of Trinity Perspectives. He's a real leader in sales, transformation, win-loss reviews and a great keynote speaker for your next kick-off, particularly in the area of customer focus. I know Cian personally, and he's a great guy, passionate about the sales profession and customer centricity. In this interview, he'll share both sales and influence strategies, particularly in relationship to our current context of COVID-19. Let's welcome Cian to Leaders for Life Radio. Well, hi Cian, and thank you so much for joining us today in Leaders for Life Radio. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, and it's lovely to be here, Mitch.
Well, lovely to have you with us, and already our listeners would have noticed those lovely lyrical tonations in your voice. Because of that, I'm going to make a very racist comment up front. And the fact that you're Irish means you're a storyteller, and I know for a fact personally what a great storyteller you are and how good you are at it. And in fact, I guess you place so much emphasis on storytelling as a way of influencing. You've got a chapter of it in your book. And from memory on page 17, you even tell us about your story in terms of your life and the direction it took. So maybe you could kick off with that story for us.
Sure. Look, storytelling is hugely important in my life, and I think it's something which is a great skill for anyone to master. And we Irish have a reputation for telling lots of stories. That's not a particularly pleasant story, I have to admit. I spent the founding part of my career in the IT sales industry in Australia, and learned a lot and loved much of what I did, not all of it. But one of the things for me was that I suffered with stress, and the way stress manifested itself for me was in health issues, specifically heart issues. And what I talk about in the book was being in an ER room and being in a position where my heart had been out of rhythm for a couple of days, and the doctor's advice was that they probably needed to stop and restart my heart in order to try and get some rhythm back into it. And that for me was, you hear about people sort of having an epiphany or rock bottom or a certain moment. And I think that was a moment for me where I thought, I really need to take stock, and I maybe need to use this as a bit of a lightning rod to change my direction or do something different. And so it wasn't immediately after that, but it was pretty shortly after that I became a cubicle escapee and jumped ship from the corporate world to set up my own business. And one of the things I wanted to do was help other sales professionals avoid ending up in that position through stress, because for me it was a health issue. For others, it's an addiction issue, or it has impacts on family or relationships. And so part of what I set out to do was actually to help address that issue and help others avoid making some of the errors that I made in my own early years.
So it's interesting, isn't it? Because we can't do anything well if we're under a state of stress. It doesn't matter whether we're playing a sport or playing a musical instrument, doing a presentation, or influencing someone in regard to a selling context. I mean, stress never helps. And what's also interesting is I think many sales professionals and influence professionals, and we're all influencing in some way, are feeling even more stressed with COVID-19. Not just about COVID-19, but how do you approach someone? How do you make sure you're authentic and real and caring, and rather than feeling quite icky in regard to selling to others in this situation? Tell us a bit about that. What are your thoughts on that?
Look, it's the sort of the $64,000 question at the moment, because all of these businesses are still moving forwards and have an expectation on their teams, albeit that they might be working from home, that they're going to keep the lights on and keep the engine running and keep selling things. But in order to do that, you have to have sales conversations, and some of those might be with existing customers, but many of them need to be with new prospects and people you've never spoken to before. And at the best of times, picking up the phone and reaching out to someone you've never spoken to before is difficult and can be awkward. But doing it during a pandemic adds a whole other layer of awkwardness and stress because you don't know what they're going through. You don't know what their business is going through. And so you run the risk of not only appearing tone deaf, but actually creating such a terrible first impression that not only do you not have that conversation, but you never have any future conversations. So that's a hugely difficult position to be in. And that's what a lot of people are trying to navigate.
So how do you navigate? I mean, you want to help, you want to show that you're there to help, and yet it might come across how am I, hey, where are you coming from? Can't you see what we're going through? Where's the empathy here? Where's the care? Yet at the same time, you still got to make those sales, because I often have said to my son, see that hospital over there, see that school there, see that retirement village. None of that happens unless someone sells something. So what do you do? Any tips about how people can approach that first encounter?
Look, I think there's a clue in the question, the way you asked it, because I think leading with empathy, leading with genuine care factor for the other person and where they're at and what's happening in their life and what's happening in their business. Asking, can you help? So sort of leading with the heart of a teacher rather than the soul of a salesperson. So what can I do to help? Is there anything we can do to support? That seems to be probably the best way of getting into the conversation, starting things off, and then you move through it. And what happens very quickly is if you've been genuinely empathetic and authentic in yourself, the conversation naturally flows from there. Now, it doesn't mean that a piece of business will immediately happen, but what a lot of organizations are doing at the moment is they're doubling down on customer care. They're doubling down on relationship building in the hopes that these are the things which, when we start to come out of the lockdown, will have deepened the relationship to such a degree that the business will then flow through. For other organizations, it's recognizing where are they at, because some businesses are thriving and reaching out to those businesses and saying, we know it's all systems go. How can we help? What can we do? So being very specific in terms of the empathetic questions up front, but also asking how can we help and how can we support seems to be the best approach. If you ignore it and pretend the elephant doesn't exist in the room, that just comes across as not just unsympathetic but incredibly inauthentic and makes people feel absolutely icky, as you described. So doing the opposite and being open to sharing what's happening in your life as well, in terms of home-based learning, in terms of fear about work, in terms of all those things, just being yourself gives them permission to be themselves, and that tends to relax people into having the right conversation.
So it would seem to me that it's what we would normally do as a great sales professional on steroids. We have a program, Why Should Anyone Be Led By Me? It could be, Why Should Anyone be or buy from me? And that is one of the nuances or the statements in that program is be more of yourself with skill. And I guess what I'm hearing you say, just be yourself. And I know the Greeks in Delphi in the temple of Apollo was that they had a sign, know thyself. So although we teach people in selling a lot of sales skills, to me, what you've said is it's just so important that you know who you are. You know who's showing up. You can't show up authentically if you don't know who you are. What are your thoughts on that in regards to salespeople being very clear on their values?
Look, I think it's really interesting. I work with a whole gamut of salespeople, but I do get to work with a lot of younger salespeople, which is a real privilege and one that and I'm absolutely delighted to be able to do. But many of those individuals are early in their careers. They don't have a ton of stories. They don't have a ton of battle scars from deals won and lost in the past. Often they're given a laptop and a script and they're told to get out there and start selling, and that's a really, really difficult position to be in. So in that scenario, my advice would be honest and let people know, look, I'm still very, very new, or I'm still relatively new in this area. I'm still learning. In my research, in the conversations I've had up until this point, this is what I'm hearing. How does that resonate with you? And you're almost giving people permission to then become more of a coach and an advisor to you than you pretending to be a subject matter expert on a topic that they know way more about and just getting found out. So being authentic also means being honest when you don't know the answer or where you don't have the depth of experience. And once you do that, again, people will tend to relax. But if we pretend we're something we're not, that's when when the wheels fall off, and that's when the phone calls end very, very quickly. I know a lot of senior executives who are incredibly frustrated at having a meeting with someone who, firstly, maybe, significantly less experienced and more junior than them, but somebody who focused on just getting the meeting, and all of a sudden they have the meeting and they don't know what to do with the
Yeah.
precious time of the individual sitting on the table, across from them, and so they blow it, and that's a real issue for a lot of, not just younger salespeople in general, is what are you showing up with? What are you showing up in terms of the insights and the value you can bring and the relationships you have? Because if you're not showing up with any of those things, you're making yourself a commodity that won't be relevant for too much longer.
It's an interesting balance, isn't it? Like one of the things that happens is if you have the experience, then if you're not careful, you can be talking at your client. But if you don't have that experience, you often may not know what questions to ask. I can remember a dimensioning study that we did when I was with Price Waterhouse. It was a jewellery client. I won't name the client, but we went around and we had a look at who were the best salespeople, and certainly those that had experience and were great at asking questions really stood out. But the next second best salespeople were the more junior ones. And so when we, in regard to the amount they sold and the dollar value of it, so when we actually interviewed them and had actually looked at them, hands-on in the various stores, what we found is, because they didn't know much about, say, diamonds or whatever, they would ask, when's the wedding? Have you got anything planned yet for the reception? Are you going away on a honeymoon? So, and they were genuine questions, because that's all they could do. So I think there's wonderful balance between knowing your stuff and then asking questions. You raised another great point, which I think is that, and that's about currency. There's many, many different currencies around, and I'm not just talking money or Bitcoin. I think the currency of COVID is mutual trust and respect. And what I hear you saying is just ringing up and saying, how are you? How can I help? What can I do for you? Without even thinking about that sale, builds a currency that long term is going to be so valuable. Do you see salespeople doing those sorts of calls at the moment, Cian?
Not just salespeople, entire businesses. I know of a number of very large global businesses, and their whole mandate to their sales team at the moment is, we don't want you to focus on just making sales. We want you to focus on finding ways to help. We want you to focus on helping to solve problems that are occurring in your clients' businesses as we speak. So those problems might be around moving to a socially distanced workforce where we're all working from home. Those problems might be around, where is your data sitting? They might be around security. They might be around any number of other different things. But it's go hunting for the new problems that are occurring and help your customers solve those, and start conversations about what's happening, what's new, what's different, and that might be around cost saving, it might be around security, it might be around any number of different things. But if you go in with, and it goes back to what you talked about in those jewelry stores, if you go in with a mindset around asking great questions and being curious and doing really good discovery, then, and this is a golden rule for any sales professionals, customers will teach us how to sell to them if we ask them the right questions, and then we shut up for long enough to listen to their answers, and then ask them the follow-up questions. And why is that important? What are the implications of that? Oh, wow, that's fascinating. And we genuinely care, and we're going in without an agenda of, I really want to sell you something. So one of the things that I say to salespeople, young and old, is just focus on earning the right to move to the next step. Don't focus on making a sale, because by focusing on making a sale, you're putting a ton of pressure on yourself, and then almost certainly you're pushing a portion of that pressure onwards to your customer or prospect.
And they would feel it too, wouldn't they?
100%.
You can feel it. Yeah.
You walk into a shop, and a shop assistant comes up and says, "Can I help you?" And you go, "No, I'm just browsing." Because even though you might want to buy something at some point, you're not at that stage of your journey just yet. You're in the browsing stage. So what we need to do is recognize where our customers are at in their journey, meet them there, and then earn the right to walk the rest of the journey with them by doing a really good job at each of those little intersections or little interfaces. And if the interface we're talking about is find out what's happening in their business and see if we can help in some way, shape, or form, then that's our sole purpose. It's dig into that, find out if we can help, and then go away and do the thing that we said we're going to do and come back and make their lives a little bit easier. And ultimately then you get that back in spades, the reciprocity at some point in the future. So that's very much, paying it forwards rather than worrying about what are we going to sell today.
Brilliant, and it's a maxim for life. It's a maxim for change. It's a maxim for influence and selling. That's meet people where they're at. And I've got to say, here's a personal plug for you. Knowing you for quite a while, you do that so beautifully. You're always showing up with that total mindset of how can I help? How can we remain curious? How can I simultaneously provoke whoever I'm working with or talking with to take them to a new level? So, on that, as the CEO of Trinity Perspectives, which we know we've given a bit of an intro here earlier on, we know it's a sales and consulting company involved with business transformation, particularly sales transformation, and also win-loss analysis. Give us a bit of an idea of what that involves and why that's so important.
Sure. So, if you picture me lying there in that bed, staring up at the cork tile ceiling in the hospital, thinking, how have I got myself in this position? One of the things that had contributed to that was the fact that, you give 3 months, 6 months of your life to a sales cycle. It can take a huge toll from a stress perspective, but also you're very invested in it. And then at the end of that process, the customer makes a buying decision and they go with you or they go with someone else. And in the industry I come from, the technology industry, the default setting is when that happens, at best, a couple of us sit around in a room and sort of, talk for a little while about what we think might have happened. And then we move on to the next one. And, I've played sport all my life. And that just struck me as just a really strange way, to approach the conclusion of a sale. Because if you've been very professional throughout a sales engagement, why aren't we doing some level of analysis? Why aren't we trying to understand, well, what actually happened and why did we lose this deal when we thought we were going to win it? And how do we win the next one? And what can we learn from this? None of those questions were being answered to my satisfaction. And so, I did the age-old thing. I started researching, is there a way to get them answered? And when I couldn't find a good response to that, I just set out to answer those questions myself and ultimately started reaching out directly to the end customers and saying, hey, could I come in and spend an hour and sit down and just kind of pick your brains on the process that you went through and ask you some questions about myself and my colleagues and ultimately try and extract some value from the sales cycle. And amazingly, most customers were really happy to participate. And maybe even more surprisingly, the stuff they told me was quite often at odds with what we had internally believed to be the things that influenced their buying decision. And so a business was born. I set out to start solving that problem for other businesses around the country and ultimately around the world. And 10 years on, we're still doing it. And we're having a ton of fascinating, incredibly deep conversations with C-suite leaders and decision makers about what actually influenced them to say yes, or in some cases to say no.
And what I love about that is often people make that delineation between is that how I said between sales and marketing. What you're doing here is you're coming in with a much stronger, call it customer centricity or customer orientation or market orientation. You're really saying, hey, not like here's our product, what do you think? But or service, what do you think? But you're really asking, why did you buy? Or why did you not buy? So you're starting with the market, which in itself shows that you actually care. Have you got any stories around how people thought it might have been, their incredible good looks and it turned out to be something else, or how they thought it was a particular part of your service, but it might be one other small thing? There must be a lot of stories, I would think, about that.
How long do we have, Mitch? There's so many. And
wow.
I'll tell you a couple of quick stories. So one piece of feedback we had from a customer, and they had picked a vendor. So this was a win review we were doing. And they said, this vendor's tender response was so appallingly bad that it very nearly didn't make the first round. So I think they had 15 compliant tender responses. This is a very, very large piece of business. And they knocked a couple of them out because they didn't meet certain criteria, and a bunch of them got sort of put through to the first round. And then they had a maybe pile. So they literally had a pile on a boardroom table of all these tender responses. And this particular vendor's tender response was on the maybe pile. And the reason it was there was because they did what so many businesses did. They received a tender and they went, we haven't really got anyone to do this. We haven't got time. So they broke it up into pieces, farmed it out to different people who all responded to different sections, then flicked it back together, Frankenstein's bride, sort of coupled it together at the 11th hour, and flicked it over the fence to the customer at 5 to 5 on a Friday afternoon. And that was their first impression. And so this customer said, we put weeks of effort into building this tender before we sent it out. And this was the first impression we had of this particular vendor. And by sheer good luck, one person on the customer side saw something that they thought, that's kind of interesting. Let's take a closer look at these guys. So they brought them into the first round. And as a result, then a whole lot of different things happened, much of which related to really, really good listening skills, and then actually deviating slightly from the tender, but saying, look, we could do it this way, but we think this would be a better outcome for you, and actually leading the customer and partnering with them, and a whole lot of other great stuff that they did. But all of that could have been for naught because they just did such a poor job. So the CEO who got that feedback from us as to why they had won this bid, but they actually should have lost it, literally the next day went out and implemented a proper formal bid management process in their organization and said, we're never going to take that risk again. So that was just a very, very simple but very powerful exercise. They would never have known how close they were to losing that piece of business if they hadn't actually, sought some feedback from the customer.
It's a major learning or thing that needs to be reinforced. Is just because we sell something doesn't really mean that we know what it's like to be the buyer. In my particular area, I may sell coaching services or training services, and I think, well, I've been in the game for a while now. I know what people want. I really don't. Unless I've been that buyer. So rather than making that massive assumption, what I love what you're doing is putting hubris aside, and there's a lot of hubris in ego. You're coming in with humility and you're saying, hey, we either did really well, can you let us know why? Or we stuffed up, can you also let us know why? Because we want to learn. And I would think in terms of currency, that, hey, you may have lost that one, but you may have set yourself up for great success further down the track, which is good.
And that's exactly right. We did one the other day, or very, very recently, and it was a loss review. And the vendor we were working with was working on another very, very significant piece of business for the same industry vertical. So they took this loss review, which was, detailed 45-minute interview with the CIO of this company. And they then used that to pivot their strategy on this much, much bigger deal that they were working on, which is still ongoing. So they haven't won it yet. But it gave them the playbook for one of their key competitors as to why they kept losing, because they just didn't understand. And as soon as the customer explained it, they said, look, they did this. And from a risk perspective, we felt much more comfortable with that. And they did risk and they did this. And from a pricing perspective, that made more sense. And all of a sudden, it was like their eyes opened and they could see this stuff. They had earned the right to this feedback, but didn't have a mechanism to take it off the table. And that's all we were doing, was really just tapping into the feedback they had already earned the right to.
It's a great example too of this fixed versus growth mindset that Dweck talks about. Fixed mindset, here's our offer, hey, we lost it, let's move on to the next one. Growth mindset, hold it, let's get the feedback, learn, readjust and go forward. So it's a maxim for life, not just selling. We have a statement which you may have heard before. It's not mine, it's from a guy called Barry Osprey from a program we do on partnership. And I think it really sums it up beautifully, and that is, come in early as a partner, not late as a judge. Because if you come in late with anything, we're forced to even judge your offer. But the earlier you can come in, and what I mean by that is asking the questions, getting close and so forth. We're doing a job at the moment, and we're going out to the field. We're interviewing not only the leaders, we're interviewing the board. We're also interviewing the direct reports of the team we'll be working with. In other words, we've got that whole stakeholder environment because we're trying to get into the customer's shoes pretty much the way that you've talked about.
Well, it's funny, Mitch, let me just quickly on that one. I'll often run offsites or workshops and that sort of thing, and I'll always ask whether we can bring a customer in on one of the afternoons, usually maybe the second day or the third day. And something which is, I find very funny and frustrating at the same time is, I'll work really hard to deliver 3 days of great content, make it really engaging and interactive and all that good stuff. And at the end, when you get the feedback from the audience, you say, what did you really enjoy? They're like, oh, Cian stuff was really great. It was fascinating. But having the customer in the room and having the opportunity to talk to them in a way that's sort of open and Chatham House rules. They can ask any questions. It's just so valuable for sales teams, and not just sales teams, for marketing and legal and pricing and everyone. And yet we do it so rarely. And I'm constantly puzzled by why we never, invite the customer inside the tent more often and earlier on in the process for our product development conversations and for a whole lot of other things, rather than doing the, if we build it, they will come philosophy, which, hasn't been proven to be that successful too often.
And it is amazing, not that I've done that much customer work, but years ago when I did it, and I think things have changed now, I would offer that suggestion, and the number of times people said, oh, no, I don't think we should be airing our dirty linen in public. In other words, there was some problems. We didn't want the customer to know that, which is just, it reeks of the fact that it's almost like a cover-up, or we're not comfortable learning, we're not comfortable sharing those vulnerabilities, and it doesn't feel or smell like a partnership, or in the words of one of my favourite movies, it's not really the vibe of the thing, as we say.
That's exactly right.
So tell me, we've talked a lot about the importance of empathy, the importance of adding value, the importance of starting where the customer's at, the importance of coming in not with a fixed mindset, with an open mindset, asking questions, looking for where you can help, not just pushing a product, earning the right. Do you think COVID-19, or maybe ask a more open question, how do you think COVID-19, if you do think it will possibly change the world of business and in particular selling?
Look, that's a great question. And I don't think I certainly have all the answers to it, but I definitely think it will change. I think one of the things which is already happening and will be happening more and more is there'll be less of the face-to-face interactions, because I think we've all become a little bit more used to the working from home situation. But even when we do go back into an office environment, customers have learned that they don't need to have a vendor in front of them from the get-go. So they may bring you in a little bit further down the track than they had done in the past, because they still want to see the whites of your eyes, and they still want to see what you're going to be like to work with, and is there a good cultural fit, and can they trust you, and all those things. But I think that's going to happen further down the funnel. So one of the things which businesses are going to have to get much, much better at is becoming easier to do business with, because I think a lot of organizations actually focus too much on their own internal process and less on what the customer wants and needs. And as a result, they've created a process which is a little bit unwieldy and a little bit time consuming. And now, as the lines between business to business and business to consumer are beginning to blur, the customers who live in business land actually want an experience which is closer to the experience they have in consumer land. And as a result, a whole lot of businesses are having to fundamentally reshape how they go to market, and reshape how they pay their people, how they present their solutions. Otherwise, they're just too hard to buy from, and they're just not getting the wallet share that they used to. So there's a lot of change happening in terms of the dynamics of how businesses are working. But from a human perspective, I think we might just let our guards down a little bit more, Mitch. I think we might show up a little bit more human, and a little bit, the amount of times, even over the last couple of weeks, where either my little boy Connor or the children of people I've been meeting with, on Zoom or whatever virtual meetings, have strolled in and come up for a cuddle with mum or dad, or asked a question, or sat in the background, and nobody blinks an eyelid. Whereas 6 weeks ago, that would have been that's a little bit unprofessional, and we probably would have mumbled under our breaths. But now, not only does it not raise any eyebrows, it's almost sort of taken as read, and I love that. I think that this sort of mask that we sometimes put on. And I've seen people, I'm sure you have too, where you know them and they're a lovely individual, and then they stand up to present, or they stand up to speak, and all of a sudden it's a completely different person, maybe very wooden, or they're reading from a script, and you're like, well, hang on a second, where did your personality go? I think, and I hope, that dynamic is going to shift a little bit, and we'll feel more comfortable in our own skin, and more comfortable just being who we are, and we can let go of some of the artifice, and I think that's going to be a really, really good thing for business.
I think you're absolutely spot on. I mean, we're seeing people's lounge rooms now. We're in their kitchens. We're in their dining rooms. We're seeing their kids, And rather than it being depersonalised, there's this wonderful sense of that we're all in it
We
together,
are.
and it actually has personalised the process.
Well, it has, and I'm sitting in my home office, and there's a guy next door building a fence, and I don't know if you can hear his drilling and his nail gun, but that's just the nature of the world we're in
Yeah,
now.
yeah.
We just have to sort of get on with it, and I'm actually really impressed with how well most people are getting on with it.
So with that, getting on with it, and I think we will. And things, as we record this, it's just about mid-May, so things do look to be getting better. One of the things that's been taken away with us from us with this pandemic is a sense of certainty.
Mm.
Like we know where we're certain we're going to have a job, where we're certain we're going to come out of it. We lost certainty in terms of social isolation and 1.5. There's a lot of certainty was taken away from us. What do you think great sales professionals can do to bring back that sense of certainty in the sales process? Because in many ways, yes, we're looking for something that works, but what we really want is that assurance of certainty.
That's a fantastic question, and I think it's a really, really interesting one because in the absence of certainty, lots of things start happening. We just go, well, let's just sort of shop the market. Let's just change everything because you know what, nothing's certain. But I actually think that we have the capacity in these uncertain times to provide some level of certainty. So one of the biggest frustrations, and we hear this all the time when we talk to customers, one of the biggest frustrations they have is they go through a sales cycle or a buying cycle or whatever term they use, and they actually create a rapport and a connection with the salesperson. And then when they sign on the dotted line, that salesperson disappears and a inverted commas account manager replaces them, and all of a sudden all of the relationship and trust and knowledge that first individual had built up disappears, and they have to start effectively retraining this new person who's going to be looking after their business. So I think account management from a sales perspective is going to become a huge point of differentiation. It's already
Right.
actually a very, very big one, but I think it's going to become an even bigger one over the next little while.
Maybe we could change the name from account management too.
Well, I think there's a
Rather
really
than
good
being
quote.
an account.
I heard a customer recently say something, and somebody was talking about the hunter versus farmer philosophy of sales. So, do we go out and hunt for new accounts,
Terrible.
or yeah? And this person just summed it up perfectly. They said, "I don't want to be someone's prey, but I don't want to be someone's produce either. I want, the best of both worlds. I want to be able to engage with someone who then stays on and looks after me and knows my business and gets to know my business better, and maybe we can deepen the relationship over time." And she was making a fantastic point because she was saying, don't look at how you construct your sales team through the eyes of you as a vendor. Look at it through my eyes as a customer and what I want, what I need, what serves my interest best, and build out your sales team that way. And that sounds like the most obvious thing in the world, but that is a revelation to most sales organizations because it never crosses their mind to start with the customer and work back in terms of how to construct their team and pay their people and all those other things.
Market orientation. We don't want a farmer or a hunter. We want someone we can sit down with and have a meal with. That's what we want.
Yeah, absolutely.
So look, I really love that voice. I just don't know what it is, the lull. I think I've got a man crush on you because of this beautiful voice you have here. And I also have it because I just know what beautiful work you do in the world and how positive you are, but also how realistic you are. What sort of pragmatic optimism can you bring to COVID-19? I mean, is there a silver lining from this whole experience? You've already talked about the relationship component. Do you see any other gems coming from our current situation?
Well, let me put it in a personal context for a moment. I have a young family and I run a business, and so those two things are not always mutually inclusive. This last period of time has allowed me to spend way more time at home with my kids, interacting, doing home-based learning, pretending that I'm the one that is the good teacher when clearly it's my wife Shelley. But it's been I suppose an adjustment at the start, and now I feel that it's almost a question of how long can we keep it going, because we're really enjoying having this family time together. We might be a little bit institutionalized, I suspect, but not in a bad way. So I think reframing. I did some coaching calls over the last couple of weeks, and 3 separate salespeople said something really, really interesting to me when I asked them, what are your aspirations over the next couple of years? 3 separate salespeople from the same organization said to me, I just want to be happy. And in 20 years in the industry, I don't think one salesperson has ever said that to me when I asked them what their aspirations were or what their growth strategy was or whatever. And it really rocked me back on my heels because, I mean, that's a very small sort of segment to be drawing any conclusions from. But the fact that 3 different salespeople said it to me in a short period of time struck me as very, very interesting. Maybe we are reframing in our own minds what constitutes success, and we're realizing that the things that we thought were important aren't, and the stuff that we've been given maybe is a little bit of a gift, and we need to keep that at the forefront of our minds.
That's
rather
beautiful.
than hoping that things go back to normal. And once they do, normal wasn't actually as great maybe as we thought it was.
No, I mean, you can look at the pollution now. You can look at how much we're connecting and with each other, and via all sorts of medium, just to say hi and just to say that we care. I think you make a great point in regard to reframing. Again, one of my favourite movies is The Castle, and Daryl Kerrigan, who's I guess the lead in that, is reframing everything. I mean, they're right under the flight path of a plane, for Pete's sake, but he reframes it as it's just fantastic, because if we ever did want to fly, which they haven't at this point, it's just so quick to get to the airport. And I think that's just an attitude of life, isn't it, to take what you've got. People say if all you've got is lemons, make lemonade. I think my wife has the same. So all you've got lemons, then make margaritas.
I think my wife might share that philosophy. There was something that really changed my outlook on, I think, business and more broadly on life many, many years ago, was this concept of what's the worst that can happen? Asking yourself that question. And from a very young age, certainly in my career, I started asking myself that question, because when you're young and you're in a hierarchical structure in an organization, it's very easy to be sort of subdued, or to have you to be put back in your box, because you sort of you believe that the hierarchy dictates who should have the opinion and whose opinion should be listened to. But I stopped believing that and decided that, what, I've got a voice. I'm an adult. I'm intelligent. I've been educated. So I'll share my opinion. It doesn't mean it's going to be acted upon, but at least I'll make sure I voice it. And when I started to get some pushback in a couple of places, this realization that the worst that could happen, the absolute worst that could happen, is I'd be fired. And I could deal with that. I could go and get another job. Not that that was likely to happen, but that was the worst. And so that was so freeing in terms of being able to stand your ground, being able to voice your opinion, not being, kowtowed by someone's position in a hierarchy. And I've maintained that for the rest of my career. When I jumped out of corporate and sat in the second bedroom going, what the hell have I done, leaving this great job? I asked myself, what's the worst that can happen? The worst that can happen is I fail miserably, which is a high probability. And then what do? At least I have no regrets, and I go out and get a proper job again. And that has kept me going all the way through, looking at the worst case scenario, making peace with it as best I can, and then going on and making decisions and taking risks and doing things that might otherwise have seemed just too hard to do.
And I love that energy, that chutzpah, that sort of that it's not a ego driven thing. It's an energy driven thing, saying I'll have a go. And as you say, what's the worst that can happen? Which brings me to a pretty important point in sales training too. Much as it's great to learn all sorts of techniques, how to ask questions, how to add value, how to do benefits, I'm convinced that the most successful sales organizations spend a lot of time with their sales force, helping them to get to know themselves, helping them to get to know their vulnerabilities, helping them to get to know their talents, helping them to get to know their needs, so they can really show up as who they are and feel very, very comfortable with that whole concept of, hey, what's the worst that can happen? I think the worst organizations I see do the opposite. It's all about sales training.
Feature function.
Rather than
show up
it's
and
the
throw
function.
Up. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, rather than who you are. And that's a lovely segue to your book, which has a subtitle of the world of sales is evolving. Are you? Maybe just tell us a little bit about why you wrote that book and why it would be a really great thing to read and have as a reference.
Look, it's interesting. I set out to write a book about win-loss analysis, and I got about halfway through, and I asked myself the question, who cares? And the answer was probably no one. And so I binned that entire manuscript, which was a very hard thing to do, and restarted. And actually, the next book, I wouldn't say it wrote itself, but it came out a lot easier because I wrote a book about why are customers making the buying decisions. So what am I hearing from them? And what does that mean for salespeople in terms of what are the skills they need to get better at? What do they need to do to stay relevant and have a career for the next 5 or 10 years? And I think that was a much more interesting book to write. And, the people I interviewed, both customers and sales professionals, brought a ton of richness to that. But also, I think it's one which, as a sales professional or a sales leader or someone who owns a business, because let's be honest, we're kind of all in sales in some way, shape, or form.
Absolutely.
It made it much more interesting because it's informed by the perspective of customers. And, I mentioned that we've been doing win-loss reviews for nearly a decade, and I continue to be surprised by what influences customers and the things that frustrate them. And you kind of alluded to it a moment ago. I thought in my heart of hearts that most deals, product and price are going to be one of the top 2 or 3 decision criteria, hands down. Nobody could disagree with me on that. And actually, that's proven to be not the case at all. What I've learned is that product and price is incredibly important, but it's important up to a point. It tends to get you from the long list of vendors being considered to the short list of vendors being considered. And once you've got from the long list to the short list, effectively you've ticked the product box, you've ticked the price box, and then the customer's in their mind saying, what else have these people got for me? And immediately it pivots to people and to purpose. So what do you like to work with? Culturally, do we like you? Do we get you? Do you get us? Do you understand us? Who else do we know that's worked with you, and what do they think? What do you like when the shit hits the fan? Will you stick around? Will you be good to work with, or are you going to disappear? What about your culture? What about the things that you stand for over and above making a profit? Have we got any connection there? Have we got any alignment there? There's all of this stuff which really, really amazed me, which is actually incredibly important in terms of when we pull the trigger and we say, yes, we're going to go with these folks and not with these folks. And you made a really good point. We should be training our salespeople much more around that sort of empathy, emotional intelligence, and intuition, asking great questions, doing discovery. But a lot of businesses still are missing a trick there, and they're focusing more on how well do you know your product and the competitive landscape, and how well can you have a conversation around the bits and the bytes. And to some point, that is important, but after a point, it loses its relevance. And if you've got nothing else when it comes to the people and the purpose conversation, you're going to struggle.
It's I always remember the words of Shakespeare: "This above all, to thine own self be true." And again, it's why salespeople, more than anyone else, need to know who they are, what they stand for, their values. I love the statement, your values determine your character, but in the end, it's your character that will determine your value. And I think what we've said today is just how important it is for you to be the right person at the right time, asking the right questions with that genuine right customer care. And I can think of no one better than yourself, Cian, to be able to do that. So at the end of this podcast here, we'll certainly give some details for people to get in touch with you. Any other little gems before we sign off?
In a world where sales has a negative perception, where we think of the used car dealership, or we think of the door-to-door salesperson, I want the sales profession to have a different image. I want people to be proud to say that they work in the world of sales. I want their kids to be proud and to aspire to maybe have a job in the industry one day. And I think the best way we can do that is a rising tide lifts all boats. So if we,
yes,
as individuals and collectively, start to do the right thing, and I think we are, and I think the vast majority of people are, I think over the next couple of years, the advent of the internet's been great because the balance of power has shifted completely to customers. They have all the information, they have all the power, they have all the control, and that's a great thing because the small number of shonky charlatans are getting found out, and they're getting booted from the industry. I think as an industry, we should be on a par with many of the other professions that people aspire to when they're young. And I think I can think of nothing better than going to a group of young people in school and saying, what do you want to do when you grow up? And at least a couple of them saying, yeah, I wouldn't mind working in sales. I think that'd be a pretty good
In fact, I think that I've been so bold as to tell them over the years, I think I've worked with more than 2,000, 3,000, almost 5,000 graduates, and they'll often ask, what do you think is a great career path? And I will say, irrespective of the function that you were trained with the uni, go get a job in selling. Get a job in selling. So I think if there's a statement I could say that would sum this all up, it would be the fact that we none of us like to be sold, but the world we're in is that we do like to buy. We like to buy. And the job of the great salesperson is to really help people buy, help people make great choices with integrity, with authenticity, and with genuine care and sincerity. And so I think those words really sum you up. So again, thank you so much for joining us today. Hopefully by the time our listeners get this, things will have eased a little bit, and they'll take the lessons away and apply them to their life, either as a salesperson or as a person of influence. So again, Cian, thanks so much for your time today.
Thanks for having me, Mitch. It's been a pleasure.
Well done, Cian. We've certainly covered a lot of ideas here. The importance of authenticity in sales, starting with empathy before presenting value, having a growth mindset, win-loss reviews. In fact, I know that Cian's on a personal crusade to make sure that every organisation does some sort of win-loss review, be it with external support or internally, because it's all about the customer. Again, thanks for listening to Leaders for Life Radio. I'll leave you now to do your own win-loss review. And remember, find the passion, develop the skills, make the numbers, and make a difference.